Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with tension, maps and red zones glowing under the projector's harsh light. Senior pilots shifted in their seats, their eyes darting toward the tactical display where a narrow strip of land glared back like a dare. 8 SEALs were trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded, running low on ammunition. Everyone knew what was at stake. Everyone also knew the odds were thin, suicidally thin. Yet when the question came, it seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. Is there a battle pilot present? The voice of Commander Rodriguez carried the weight of 20 years of command, but no one answered. Chairs creaked as men shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at the floor. Others studied the maps as though they might suddenly offer a way out. No one wanted to admit the truth. The mission profile called for a landing no one believed survivable. Sarah Mitchell sat in the back row, her small frame easy to miss among the taller, broader men. She had slipped into the room without announcement, her presence overlooked by most. She wasn't surprised. People rarely noticed her until they needed something. She had learned to live in that shadow. To many, she was just another junior lieutenant, a quiet pilot who logged her hours and never drew attention. But her logbook told a different story. 2,000 flight hours in the FA-18 Super Hornet, record-setting landings, a reputation among mechanics for precision that bordered on obsessive. Still, no one looked her way, and maybe that was a blessing. She could listen without the burden of expectation. Rodriguez's gaze swept the room again. His eyes were sharp, searching for the rare kind of aviator who thrived under fire, who didn't just fly the machine but became it. Silence answered him back. Sarah's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the strange calm that came before she made the hardest decisions. Her father's voice flickered in her mind, a Vietnam veteran who had told her once, in one of his rare, vulnerable moments, "Some things are worth everything, even if nobody ever knows your name." She breathed in slowly. 8 men out there were counting on someone. Their families were probably eating breakfast, unaware that their fathers, brothers, husbands were cornered in a place too small to name. Someone needed to rise. But still she waited, giving the others their chance. Several senior pilots cleared their throats, calculated fuel, terrain, and ammunition in their heads. The mathematics were cruel. Getting in was unlikely. Getting out with 8 passengers on board nearly impossible. They knew it. She knew it. Rodriguez's hand tightened around the edge of the table. He was seconds from speaking again when Sarah's legs moved before her mind caught up. She stood. No hand raised, no voice announcing her intent, just a silent rise that drew every head in the room. Conversations halted. The hum of the projectors seemed suddenly loud. A few of them blinked as if they were seeing her for the first time. Some didn't even know her name. She had trained beside them, flown the same missions, eaten in the same mess hall, but anonymity had always wrapped around her like a cloak. She never chased recognition. She chased precision. And now, as she stood silently, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes pressing against her. Rodriguez's brow furrowed. He recognized her face but not the details. "State your name and qualifications," he said, his tone clipped, testing. Her voice didn't tremble. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, sir, 2,000 hours in the Super Hornet, carrier qualified, certified for low-altitude penetration missions." She hesitated for only a breath before adding, "I hold the base record for precision landings." A ripple passed through the room, an audible murmur. Pilots who had dismissed her leaned forward. That record wasn't rumor. It was legend. Achieved in storm conditions so severe most had refused to fly, beating a man with 15 years seniority. Rodriguez tapped at his tablet, pulling up her file. His eyes scanned quickly, exceptional situational awareness, instinctive pilot, calm under crisis. No signs of recklessness, no hunger for glory. This was someone who believed she could survive the impossible. He lifted his gaze. The landing zone is 300 feet long, mountain terrain at 8,000 feet, Enemy positions on all sides. You'll be under fire the entire time. There are no second chances. Are you certain? Sarah didn't flinch. Yes, sir. Inside, her heart was steady. She had rehearsed it all in silence, ever since the mission brief began. The angles, the descent path, the thrust ratios. She could see it as clearly as if she had already flown it 100 times. The base commander stepped forward, his voice heavier with caution. "Lieutenant, if you miss this approach, there won't be another." Her lips curved, not in arrogance but in quiet conviction. "I won't miss." For a moment, the air itself seemed to shift. Even those who had doubted felt it, the still, unshakable calm of someone who had already committed her soul to the mission. Rodriguez didn't hesitate further. He had survived too long to ignore that kind of certainty. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you're authorized to proceed. 30 minutes for planning and pre-flight." The room burst into motion. Staff hustled with updates, charts, weather reports, last-minute intelligence. But Sarah barely noticed. Her mind narrowed into a tunnel of focus. Chief Martinez, her crew chief, found her near the map table. His voice carried years of weariness and worry. "Ma'am, I've got your bird ready, but are you sure?" She finally allowed herself a small smile. "Chief, I've been training my whole life for this." And in that moment, the silence that had always followed her felt different. Not the silence of being overlooked, but the silence of resolve, the kind that speaks louder than any boast. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. The hangar awaited, the machine awaited, 8 men awaited. And Sarah Mitchell, the one they hadn't seen until now, was already gone in her mind, flying low and fast through fire, into a valley no one else dared enter. What no one in that briefing room knew, what she hadn't told them, was that she was ready not just to risk her life, but to leave it there if that's what it took. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the loudest answer of all. What drives a person to step willingly into the impossible? The question lingered in Sarah's chest as she walked briskly from the briefing room toward the hangar. The corridors of the base seemed narrower, louder, filled with rushing footsteps and clipped voices. Orders flew, printers spat updated maps, and radios hissed with constant chatter. Yet inside her head, everything was quiet. She wasn't thinking about failure. She wasn't even thinking about survival. She was thinking about precision, about the exact thrust she'd need to bleed speed, the split second when flaps would deploy, the 1,000 tiny corrections her hands would make without her mind needing to catch up. The mission wasn't just dangerous, it was nearly unspeakable. 300 feet of rock-choked clearing at altitude, enemy positions already sighting in, a wounded team trapped with their backs to the cliffs. It was the kind of profile you didn't give to a pilot, you gave it to a myth. But Sarah didn't believe in myths. She believed in repetition, in discipline, in the way her father once told her that courage isn't louder than fear, it's steadier. She entered the flight planning room. The map table was covered with satellite images. Jagged ridges clawed across the photos, valleys carved like scars. Red markers bloomed across the terrain, enemy positions choking nearly every approach. The LZ was barely visible, just a pale scar of dirt and rock tucked between shadows. She traced her finger along a potential flight path, murmuring numbers under her breath: wind speed, descent angle, stall threshold. To anyone else it looked impossible. To her it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Martinez appeared again at her shoulder, his coveralls streaked with grease, his eyes lined from years of watching pilots walk out but not return. "You'll be flying into a buzz saw, Lieutenant. That valley isn't wide enough to breathe in." Sarah didn't look up. "I know." He sighed, running a hand over the stubble on his chin. "You're not afraid." Her pen paused. "Of course I'm afraid, but fear isn't the point." That startled him into silence. Sarah kept marking notes. The weight of the aircraft with 8 additional passengers, the adjusted climb rate, The fact that she'd be relying not on what was probable, but on what was barely possible. When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. "Get her ready, Chief." Martinez swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The next 20 minutes blurred into ritual. Every pre-flight check done twice, hands gliding over panels, cables, fuel lines. Sarah's touch was clinical, almost tender, as if she were reading the aircraft like Braille. No detail too small. Every lever, every latch mattered. Because this wasn't just her machine anymore. It was 8 strangers' lifeline. The hangar rattled with the rising roar as the Super Hornet came alive. The sound was bone-deep, vibrating the air with 35,000 pounds of thrust waiting to be unleashed. The ground crew moved with urgent precision, signaling, double-checking, loading the last of what little could be carried. Sarah climbed the ladder and slid into the cockpit. The seat felt like home. The canopy lowered, shutting out the noise. In the sealed cocoon of glass and metal, there was nothing but her breath and the hum of instruments. The radio crackled, final coordination from the operations center, weather updates. The SEAL team's condition worsening by the minute, movement on 3 sides, ammunition low, 1 man wounded but still holding. Time was running out. She adjusted her helmet, locking it snug, her HUD flickering alive in front of her. Her call sign, Viper 1, blinked at the top of the display. She keyed the mic. "Operations, this is Viper 1, pre-flight complete, ready for tasking." The tower's voice came, clipped and tense. "Viper 1, you are cleared for immediate departure." For the first time, Sarah allowed herself a breath that wasn't calculated. She advanced the throttles. The jet surged forward, engines screaming against the concrete. Her hands steady, her eyes fixed ahead. The moment the wheels lifted, there was no turning back. No second thoughts, the mission had begun. Climbing into the gray-blue dawn, she banked eastward, the landscape rolling beneath her. The world looked peaceful from altitude, like a painted map. But she knew better. Somewhere in that jagged wilderness, 8 men were fighting for their lives. Her radio hissed. The SEAL team's voice came through, rough, calm, weathered with combat. "Viper 1, this is Bravo leader. Enemy movement closing on our position. How long until you reach us?" She checked her nav display, ran the numbers without hesitation. 8 minutes to your position. Can you hold?" "We'll hold," came the reply. A pause. "But this LZ is going to be hot. You'll be taking fire the moment you break the ridge." Sarah's knuckles flexed on the stick. Understood. There was no bravado, no reassurance, just the truth. The minutes ticked by in a rhythm that felt both endless and fleeting. The mountains rose sharper ahead, peaks cutting into the sky. She dropped altitude, weaving low, hugging the terrain to stay masked from enemy radar. The valleys narrowed into canyons, each turn a knife's edge. Her breathing slowed, her body molding into the machine. Every second closer, the risk multiplied. Every mile eaten by her engines was another beat of borrowed time for the men on the ground. As she crested the final ridge, she saw it, the valley, smaller than she imagined, smoke curling from multiple positions, tracer fire stitching the air like sparks from a grinder, a strip of ground so unforgiving it barely deserved the word landing zone. Her HUD flashed warnings, threat indicators screamed. The first tracers streaked past her canopy. She keyed her mic, voice calm. "Bravo leader, Viper 1 beginning final approach." "Copy, Viper 1, welcome to the party." The words came with a grim humor that masked desperation. Sarah's hands tightened, the descent began. Tracer rounds flared. Her cockpit filled with the sound of alarms. Enemy fire lit the air ahead like fireworks, deadly, precise, merciless. She ignored the instinct to pull up. She ignored the voice of survival that begged her to climb. She locked on to the narrow scar of earth below, every sense narrowing to that single target. Because 8 lives waited, and she was their only chance. What she hadn't told anyone, not even Martinez, not even herself until now, was that she was prepared to trade her life for theirs. And she might have to. She dropped below the ridge, and the world erupted. Tracer fire slashed the sky, bright streaks of death tearing past her canopy. The cockpit shook with the metallic ping of rounds biting into her fuselage. Warning tones shrieked in her headset, each one a reminder that the valley she had committed to was a kill box. Every nerve in Sarah's body screamed at her to abort, to pull up, climb out, save herself. But she pressed the stick forward, throttling back just enough to bleed speed without stalling. The landing zone loomed ahead, a patch of dirt so narrow it looked like a cruel joke. She could see them now, the SEALs, firing from cover, muzzle flashes punching against the gloom. Smoke rose around them, acrid plumes marking where mortars had struck. They were pinned but still fighting, disciplined even in desperation. And now their eyes turned skyward toward her. 30 seconds out, she transmitted, voice steady though her pulse hammered. An explosion blossomed off her left wing. A missile had detonated close enough to rattle her bones. Shrapnel peppered her port engine, alarms flaring across her instrument panel. The engine still spun, but sluggish, wounded. Her training kicked in. She adjusted trim, diverted power, compensated with her starboard engine. She had practiced asymmetric landings before, but never while the sky tried to kill her. The ground surged closer. The strip of earth narrowed in her vision. "Come on," she whispered to the aircraft, coaxing it, willing it, as if it could hear her. The main gear hit hard, too hard. A bone-rattling jolt shuddered through the fuselage. The nose slammed down a second later, brakes screeching, drag chute deploying in a violent bloom. Dust and rock exploded around her as the Hornet tore along the strip. 50 feet, 40, 20. A jagged boulder loomed like a wall. The jet screamed to a stop with barely 20 feet to spare. Her heart hammered. She had landed inside a coffin. The canopy popped, hot air rushing in with the smell of gunpowder and dust. She could already see them, 8 figures sprinting toward her with brutal efficiency, weapons still firing. One was limping, dragged by a teammate. Another turned mid-run, firing bursts to cover the retreat. Sergeant Thompson appeared beneath her cockpit, face streaked with grime and sweat, his eyes locked with hers. "Outstanding flying, Lieutenant," he shouted over the roar of gunfire. "But we need to move now, mortars inbound." Sarah's hands flew over the controls, running a takeoff checklist at record speed. Around her, the SEALs clambered into the rear compartment, hauling the wounded man with practiced precision. Their movements were sharp, urgent, stripped of anything unnecessary. They had been here before too many times. "Last man aboard," Thompson called, dropping into the seat behind her. He secured the wounded with one hand, his rifle still clutched in the other. "We're ready, ma'am." She didn't answer, she couldn't. Her focus tunneled to the throttle. She slammed it forward. The engines screamed, one stronger than the other but both giving everything they had. The Hornet lurched, skidding across dirt and rock, bullets sparking off her wings, mortars whistling overhead. The valley walls rushed toward her. "Come on, lift," she demanded, muscles straining as if her will alone could drag the aircraft into the sky. The Hornet surged, nose lifting, gears grinding over rock. For a heartbeat, it felt like she'd never leave the ground. Then the earth fell away, the aircraft clawing into the sky. Cheers erupted behind her, brief, fierce, cut short by discipline. They weren't safe yet, not even close. The ridge line loomed. She pulled hard, the jet groaning, wounded engine coughing smoke. Every foot of climb felt stolen. Then finally they cleared the ridge. But the reprieve was fragile. Her fuel readouts flickered lower than planned, the damaged engine burning faster than it should. Behind her, the SEALs checked weapons, reloaded, tended the wounded, all with the grim silence of men who knew this wasn't over. Sarah's hands never left the controls. She could feel every vibration, every hesitation in the machine. One more hit and it would all end here, in fire and rock. Her radio crackled. Viper 1, this is Overlord. Be advised, enemy aircraft vectoring to your position. ETA 5 minutes. Her blood chilled. Fighters. The one threat she couldn't outrun in her crippled jet, not with 8 passengers weighing her down. She keyed her mic. Overlord, request immediate escort. A pause, then, negative Viper 1. All assets engaged elsewhere. You're on your own until you reach the carrier patrol. 15 minutes. 15 minutes, against fighters closing in 5. She exhaled a soundless breath, not fear, resolve. Behind her, Thompson leaned forward, voice low but steady. Lieutenant, if they find us, we'll fight. We've got rifles. We're not going down quiet. The offer was useless against jet fighters, but Sarah understood. It wasn't about weapons. It was about solidarity, about telling her she wasn't alone in this fight. She tightened her grip on the stick. Then let's make them work for it. The valley fell away beneath them, the horizon stretching wide. The wounded bird still flew, still clawed against gravity, still carried them home. But the radar told the truth. 2 enemy blips closing fast. Sarah's heart slowed, her world narrowing to the dance ahead. She had volunteered to fly into the impossible. She had gotten them out of the fire. Now she had to keep them alive in the sky. And she knew this would be the hardest part yet. How long could she keep a crippled fighter alive? The question burned in Sarah's mind as the radar pulsed 2 bright blips, enemy aircraft, closing fast from the northeast. The valley behind them had vanished into haze, but the danger ahead was sharper than ever. Her Hornet wasn't just damaged. It was bleeding strength, every vibration reminding her the port engine could fail at any moment. And 8 lives weighed the jet heavier than steel. Viper 1, Overlord, hostiles within 20 miles, 5 minutes to missile range, no escort in position. 5 minutes, against fighters running clean, sharp, and hungry. She pushed her good engine harder, coaxing every ounce of thrust. The Hornet groaned, smoke trailing faintly in the dawn light. Her fuel flow spiked higher than safe. A voice deep inside whispered that she wouldn't make it home. She silenced it. Her father's words returned, steady and low. Impossible just means nobody done it yet. Brace back there, she called over the intercom, her tone clipped. Behind her, the SEALs strapped tighter, weapons ready, even though their rifles couldn't scratch enemy fighters. Still, they prepared, because warriors never sat idle when death closed in. Thompson's voice carried through the headset, calm, measured. Whatever comes, Lieutenant, we trust you. The words hit harder than the enemy's missiles. Trust. Blind, unshaken trust. She carried more than their weight, she carried their faith. Her threat warning tone shrieked, missile lock. Sarah's pulse didn't spike, it slowed, focused. Missile inbound, she muttered, yanking the Hornet into a violent dive. Gravity crushed her into the seat, 7GS pressing her chest, black edges creeping at her vision. She popped chaff and flares, streaks of fire against the sky. The missile streaked closer. Her wounded engine coughed, protesting. The sky became nothing but threat and instinct. Then a flash. The missile veered, fooled by the flare, exploding harmlessly off her wing. The airframe rocked, alarms howled, but she was still airborne. Missile defeated, she called through clenched teeth. Cheers erupted in the back, brief and rough, cut short when the threat tone screamed again. A second launch. This time she rolled inverted, nose slicing toward the ground, yanking hard. The SEALs grunted as gravity crushed them. A third warning light flared, hydraulics straining. Her controls grew heavier, stiffer, like dragging stone through water. She spat another burst of chaff. The second missile blew past, missing by yards. The shockwave rattled her canopy, shrapnel spattering the fuselage. Her fuel gauge dipped faster. She had seconds to breathe before her radar painted a third bandit, another enemy fighter joining the hunt. 3 against 1, a crippled one. Her throat tightened but her voice stayed steady. Overlord Viper 1, hostiles increasing, where's my escort? Static, then a clipped voice. Viper 1 lightning lead, 2 minutes out, hold on. 2 minutes, a lifetime in combat. Her radar shrieked again. Missile launch number 3. Sarah's mind sharpened, angles and speeds dancing like instinct. She banked low, hugging terrain, flares spraying in a desperate arc. The missile chased close, too close, detonating near her tail. The blast hammered the Hornet. Systems blinked red. Hydraulics dropped into the danger zone. Smoke curled heavier from her port engine. The jet felt broken under her hands, its breath ragged, but it still flew. "Lieutenant," Thompson's voice barked from the rear, "we're still with you, don't give them an inch." Her lips pressed tight, she wouldn't. She snapped the Hornet into another evasive turn, forcing her body through crushing GS. The SEALs braced, silent, as if their stillness could lend her strength. Then her radio lit with salvation. Lightning lead tally bandits, engaging now. Through the canopy, distant streaks slashed the sky, friendly fighters screaming in, sharp and deadly. Radio chatter erupted, professional, clipped, lethal. Sarah held her course, keeping her crippled bird alive while the cavalry struck. She couldn't see the dogfight directly, but the comms painted the picture. Lock-ons, missile calls, kills confirmed. Minutes dragged like hours. Then silence, the enemy gone, either burning or fleeing. Viper 1, lightning lead, sky clear, we're on your wing all the way home. Sarah exhaled, the breath trembling only after it left her body. Relief was a luxury she couldn't afford, but for 1 second she allowed it. Behind her, the SEALs murmured quiet thanks, hands gripping shoulders, lives reclaimed from the edge. But Sarah didn't celebrate, not yet. Her jet was crippled, her fuel was low. Every warning light glared like a reminder they weren't safe until wheels touched base. She steadied her hands on the controls, eyes forward. The horizon stretched wide, but the road home was still long. And in the silence of her cockpit, one truth pulsed steady as her heartbeat. She hadn't just flown them out of the fire. She was carrying their lives inside her hands. And she couldn't let go. What happens when silence becomes heavier than the noise of war? The cockpit was quiet now, too quiet. After the screaming tones of missile locks, the thunder of explosions, the crackle of frantic comms, the absence of chaos felt unnatural. Only the steady drone of engines, one coughing, one strained, filled Sarah's headset. She didn't relax, couldn't. She knew the mission wasn't over until her wheels kissed asphalt, until the SEALs behind her touched solid ground. Her eyes flicked across the instrument panel. Warning lights glowed like embers in the dark. Hydraulic pressure low, fuel consumption high, temperature spikes on the port engine. The Hornet was limping but still carrying them, still obeying her. She adjusted her grip on the stick, easing pressure, coaxing rather than commanding. "Easy, girl," she whispered, "just a little longer." No one else heard her, but the words steadied her. "Lieutenant," Thompson's voice came through the intercom, low and gravel-edged. "How bad is it?" She hesitated. Soldiers deserved truth, but sometimes truth was a weight. "She's wounded," Sarah admitted, "but she's still flying." There was a pause, then his voice softened though the grit remained. "So are we." Her throat tightened. She pictured them back there, mud-streaked, exhausted, battered, but alive. One of them bleeding, others guarding him like a shield. They had trusted her when she rose in silence back at the briefing. Now their lives rode every twitch of her hands. Minutes stretched. The escort fighters kept formation, their presence both a comfort and a reminder. Without them, she would already be falling from the sky. She checked fuel again. Not good. The damaged engine was drinking faster, pushing her margin thinner. At this rate, she'd land with fumes in her tanks, if she landed at all. She thought of her father, of the old photograph she kept tucked inside her flight bag, him in uniform, standing stiff, unsmiling, eyes shadowed by a war he never described. He had carried silence like a second skin, but in rare moments he had spoken, and his words returned now. Some things are worth any price. Her chest ached. Was this what he meant? That sacrifice wasn't a grand gesture, but a quiet decision to keep going when everything said stop. Her headset crackled. Viper 1 Overlord status update. Sarah keyed the mic. Her voice was steady, stripped of doubt. Aircraft damaged, fuel low, crew intact, continuing RTB. The acknowledgement was curt, but beneath it she sensed something. The weight of every life on that base listening to her progress. They knew what she carried. She descended gradually, saving what fuel she could, letting gravity do part of the work. The world stretched beneath her, rivers glinting, ridges sprawling, towns scattered like forgotten pieces. Somewhere down there, families lived ordinary lives. Children laughed, unaware that 8 fathers had been minutes from never coming home. That thought pierced deeper than the fear of failing. It wasn't just about the SEALs. It was about the unseen faces waiting for them. Behind her, quiet conversations drifted through the intercom. The medic checking vitals, Thompson murmuring encouragement, a soft chuckle here and there, dark humor in the face of what they'd survived. It struck her then how warriors carried themselves when broken, not loud, not boastful, just steady. And she realized she wanted to be remembered that way too, not as a headline but as steady. Her fuel alarm chimed, a cold, clinical reminder, 10 minutes left in her margin. Lightning lead, she called. Confirm carrier patrol in range. Affirmative, Viper 1. We've got you. Stay on heading 090. Her jaw clenched. The base was near, but so was the edge of her endurance. Hydraulic pressure dropped another notch. The controls stiffened, her arms burning from the constant correction. Sweat soaked her gloves. Every movement required more strength, more will. She could feel her body fraying, but she wouldn't let it show, not to the men behind her, not to herself. Almost home, she whispered. And then she saw it, faint at first, then clear. The runway, long, dark, lined with flashing lights, emergency vehicles already waiting, a beacon in the dusk. Her chest tightened. Relief threatened to break her concentration, but she shoved it down. This was the most dangerous part. Because bringing a broken bird home wasn't about flying. It was about precision, about every inch, about not letting exhaustion steal the last ounce of focus. She keyed her mic one final time. Overlord Viper 1, beginning final approach. The silence in the cockpit was absolute. 8 men held their breath. 1 woman held their lives. And Sarah Mitchell, steady as silence itself, guided them toward home. Here's part 5, approximately 1,600 words equivalent packing. Covering the strained flight home. Fuel bleeding, hydraulics failing, her reflections on her father, the SEALs, quiet resilience, and the first glimpse of the runway. Do you want me to continue with part 6, detailing the final landing sequence? The razor-edge descent, the wounded jet's last struggle, and the moment they finally touched down. You said. Zix. ChatGPT said. Writing ID equals 91,629. Variant equals standard. Title equals cinematic narrative part 6. Why do the last few miles feel like the longest? The runway stretched ahead, black asphalt bordered by flashing strobes, a lifeline in the twilight. Emergency lights pulsed along its edges, rescue crews already staged, ambulances waiting like sentinels. Sarah's eyes locked on it, refusing to blink. She had carried them this far. She could not falter now. But her Hornet fought her every step. The hydraulics were nearly gone, controls sluggish and heavy, her arms screaming as she hauled against the stick. The wounded port engine spat smoke, coughing unevenly, each shudder rattling her bones. Warning lights painted her cockpit in angry red. Behind her, silence. 8 men strapped in, waiting, trusting. She could almost feel their breath holding with hers. Viper 1, the tower called, voice taut. Winds cross from the south at 12 knots. Emergency crews standing by. You are cleared to land." Her jaw tightened, crosswinds, as if she needed another complication. She whispered under her breath, the words not for them but for herself. "Steady, steady." She began her descent. Nose down, flaps deployed. The Hornet bucked slightly, hydraulics lagging, controls sluggish. Her arms burned as she forced the aircraft onto line. Sweat rolled into her eyes, stinging, but she couldn't stop to wipe it away. The SEALs braced harder, rifles secured, the wounded man strapped as best as possible. Thompson's voice came faint, calm through the intercom. "Whatever happens, we're ready." Sarah's lips pressed into a hard line. Not ready to die, ready to live. Altitude bled away. The runway widened in her vision, every flashing light a target she had to hit exactly. Too high, she'd overshoot. Too low, she'd tear into the ground. Too far left, too far right, and it would all end in fire. "Come on," she murmured, coaxing the Hornet down. The aircraft shuddered, one final protest, as if it wanted to give up before the finish line. Her muscles locked, refusing to let it. Altitude 200 feet, airspeed barely enough. The ground surged up. Her eyes narrowed, timing everything. Stick, throttle, rudder, every move had to be perfect or 8 lives would end with hers. The main gear hit hard, a brutal impact that jarred every bone in her body. Tires screeched, brakes engaged, drag chute deployed. The Hornet roared in pain, shuddering, straining against momentum. 50 knots, 40, 30. The nose slammed down, jarring her teeth. The bellow of engines drowned the world. Sparks flew as brakes clawed against asphalt. Then stillness. The Hornet ground to a halt, shuddering, smoke curling from its wounds. The silence that followed was deafening. For one fragile second, Sarah just sat there, hands locked around the stick, chest heaving, unable to move. The mission had ended, but her body hadn't caught up. Then the canopy lifted, and the world rushed in, air, noise, hands reaching, voices shouting. "Lieutenant, you're clear." Thompson appeared at her side, face streaked with sweat and dirt, but eyes bright with something she hadn't seen before. Respect. "Hell of a ride," he muttered, helping unclip her harness. "You just brought us home." She climbed down stiffly, boots hitting the tarmac. For the first time since she stood in that briefing room, she let her body sag, exhaustion pouring through her. Around her, medics rushed to the wounded, ground crew swarmed the broken jet, emergency lights painting the scene in flickers of red and white. But she stood still, her eyes on the men she had carried back. They weren't cheering, they weren't loud, they were simply alive, and that was enough. Rodriguez was there too, his weathered face unreadable as he approached. He stopped in front of her, gaze sharp, heavy with something between gratitude and awe. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said slowly, "you just did the impossible." Her throat tightened, but she shook her head. "No, sir, just what needed to be done." His eyes lingered, as if searching for the truth behind her words, but she gave him nothing more. Because Sarah knew heroics weren't loud. They were silent, steady, and often unseen. And as the lights flashed around her, the wounded SEAL carried toward safety, and the roar of the broken Hornet faded into stillness. She felt it deep in her chest. Sometimes survival wasn't victory. Sometimes survival was dignity. And tonight, dignity had flown them home. What does silence feel like when the battle is over? The airfield was chaos, sirens, shouts, the screech of stretcher wheels across asphalt. Medics swarmed the wounded SEAL, rushing him into the ambulance under a wash of red lights. Ground crews circled the Hornet, hands running over its battered frame, their voices low with disbelief that it had survived at all. The jet looked broken, scarred by fire and shrapnel, but it stood, like its pilot. Sarah lingered at the edge of it all, her helmet tucked under one arm. Exhaustion hit her in waves, heavy and sudden, but she forced herself to stand tall. Adrenaline had carried her through, but now her body wanted to collapse. Still, she stayed upright, not for herself, for the men she had carried back. Thompson approached first, his stride steady despite fatigue. Dirt streaked his face, his eyes still sharp. He stopped in front of her, extending a hand. His grip was firm, the gesture simple but weighted. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "we owe you more than we can ever repay." She shook her head. "No debts, just duty." His jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he gave a sharp nod, the kind only soldiers give each other, then turned back toward his men. One by one, the SEALs glanced her way. Some nodded, others simply met her eyes for a second too long. No words were needed. Respect didn't always come in speeches. Sometimes it came in silence. The crowd thinned as the medics sped away and the ground crews pulled the Hornet into the hangar. Rodriguez finally stepped forward. His face was lined, his voice low, carrying the weight of command. "Lieutenant Mitchell." She straightened instinctively. "You volunteered for what most called impossible, and you brought them home." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" Sarah hesitated. The easy answer was loyalty, or training, or courage, but none of those were the truth. The truth was quieter. "Because someone had to," she said finally, "and no one else stood." He studied her for a long moment. Then, with a slight nod, he turned and walked away. The base commander, Colonel Harrison, came next. He was slower, his gaze gentler. "You understand what you just did, Lieutenant. Most would have written that mission off as a loss." Her chest tightened. She thought of her father, of the photo, of the words he had once said, "Some things are worth everything." She met Harrison's gaze. They weren't a loss, not while someone could try. The colonel's eyes softened. "Get some rest, you've earned it." But rest didn't come. Hours later, when the base had quieted, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the dim light of the hangar. The Hornet rested nearby, its skin scorched, panels missing, scars deep. Mechanics would patch it, make it whole again. But it would never be the same. Neither would she. She traced her fingers along the metal, feeling every dent like a wound. Her body ached, her arms still heavy from hauling the controls, but what gnawed at her most was the silence. Not the silence of being ignored, the silence of after. She thought about the 8 men, about their families who still had no idea how close they'd come to losing everything. She imagined a little girl waiting at a door, a wife pouring coffee at a kitchen table, a father hugging his son. Lives uninterrupted because of tonight. The weight of that pressed harder than fear ever had. Her chest tightened, tears threatening, but she didn't cry, not here, not now. Instead, she whispered to the machine she had flown through hell, "We did it." Her voice cracked, but the words stayed steady. From the far end of the hangar, Martinez's voice broke the stillness. "Ma'am." She turned. He stood with grease still on his hands, his eyes heavy but burning with something like pride. He didn't speak more. He didn't need to. The look said everything. She nodded once, he nodded back. And the silence returned, heavy but not empty. Because sometimes silence wasn't absence. Sometimes silence was respect. And tonight, silence surrounded Sarah Mitchell like armor. How do you honor a moment that words can't hold? Weeks later, the ceremony was staged under the open sky. Flags rippled in the breeze, rows of uniforms gleamed, and speeches rolled across the crowd like rehearsed thunder. The Navy had turned the mission into a story, polished and packaged. Heroism, valor, sacrifice. Medals gleamed on velvet trays, waiting to be pinned. Sarah stood at the edge of the platform, her dress uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. She had been summoned, briefed, dressed for recognition. But she felt like an intruder. The mission hadn't been about her. It had been about 8 men trapped in a valley who had needed someone, anyone, to come. Colonel Harrison's voice carried over the loudspeakers, steady and formal. He spoke of courage, of impossible odds, of duty above self. He called her name. The crowd applauded, a wave of sound pressing against her chest as she stepped forward. The medal was pinned to her uniform, cameras clicked. Words of thanks were spoken, she saluted, she nodded, she played her part. But inside she felt none of it. Because the truth wasn't in the medal, or the applause, or the speeches. The truth was in the quiet, in the way Thompson had looked at her on the tarmac, in the nods from men who had seen death and walked away because she refused to let go of the stick, in the silence of the hangar that night when she laid her hand on the battered skin of the Hornet and whispered to it like a friend. After the ceremony, when the crowds dispersed and the uniforms faded back into duty, Sarah slipped away. She found herself by the water's edge, the base quiet behind her. The sea stretched wide, endless, its horizon blurring into the sky. She breathed deep, the salt air sharp, grounding. For the first time, she let herself think of what might have been. The thousand ways she could have failed. The thousand ways her name could have ended carved into a memorial wall instead of read over loudspeakers. Fear hit her then, not in the moment of danger but in the safety after. Her hands trembled. She pressed them into her knees until the shaking stopped. A memory rose, her father sitting in his old chair, his eyes shadowed. Courage isn't louder than fear, it's steadier. She closed her eyes, tears finally slipping free. He had been right. Courage was not the roar of engines or the blaze of combat. It was standing when others stayed seated. It was steady hands in chaos. It was silence in the face of noise. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly. Thompson, he didn't say much, he never did, just stood with her watching the horizon. After a long silence he spoke. "We'll never forget." Sarah nodded, unable to answer. Because she didn't want to be remembered as a hero. She wanted to be remembered as someone who did what was necessary when it mattered most. The sun dipped lower, staining the water gold. Later in reports and articles her name would appear. People would call her extraordinary. They would speak of records, skill, bravery, but Sarah knew better. She wasn't extraordinary. She was a pilot who stood when no one else did. And sometimes that was enough. As the sea whispered against the shore, she finally let herself breathe. Not victory, not pride, just the steady exhale of survival. And in that breath, one truth settled deep. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.